we go. We are recording. How exciting. So today is before house rules. Okay. First things first, I'm putting into the chat now a link to a Padlet site. Okay, so you might want to have that open. It's a Padlet page where you can add some thoughts or questions, but also there's the chat in this Zoom call that you can use. Now, Steve, earlier you described this incredibly well, when to use chat and when to use Padlet. Would you like to just share that before we get cracking?
Henry, I'd be delighted. So what we would like you to do is if you could use the chat function on Zoom to sort of record your thoughts and responses directly to what you're seeing. So anything that occurs to you, any kind of direct responses you have to the pieces that you see, will go in the chat, and any kind of questions that emerge from that also in the chat. So we'll be monitoring the chat as we go. There'll be opportunities for people to ask questions throughout, and then a Q&A at the end. So if the questions could go in the chat, that would be great. Now, the Padlet is for things that you are excited about moving forward. So kind of themes that you're kind of seeing that might be useful for future work. We're really interested to kind of capture that today as well and kind of develop, as I say, this network. So the Padlet for future dreams, the chat for the now.
I mean, he's great, isn't he, Steve? I think we need to do some reactions to celebrate Steve's explanation there. Now, it's also worth saying that this is a network which is quite new, and we have University of Western Scotland, and we have a variety of South African practitioners and Ghanaian practitioners, but we have also hot off the press today some work to share from Malawi as well, which I will be sharing. But this is a very, very new collaboration, so we'll be sort of thinking out loud a bit about that as well. So today's billed as a research seminar, but I'm really hoping the spirit of the event today feels like a genuine conversation between us presenting and the students, actors, academics, and people with nothing better to do on a Wednesday who are here today. And we've split today in half. The first half, we're going to be presenting our reflections on a variety of lockdown Shakespeare practice that's happened in South Africa, Ghana, Scotland, and Malawi. Before we then open up the floor for a conversation and questions. Now, many of you here today are actual performers who have been in these things, who have lived experience of these processes, and I really hope you'll all feel brave enough to share your thoughts. So let's just do a little experiment to kind of break this hierarchy of presenter and audience just for a second. I want us to all think about and bring to our brains a line from Shakespeare, okay? Now, if you've been a performer, choose a line from your lockdown Shakespeare thing. If you're a member of the public, think of something now. And I want everybody, and this is probably going to break Zoom, so if it does, it's been great seeing you all. I want you all to say it, okay? So I'm going to count us down from 5, everyone, all right? And we're all going to say a line from Shakespeare from all the different bits of the world we're in. We've got someone in Brazil there, which is great. So get that line from Shakespeare in your head, okay? Speak out loud. So I'm going to ask everyone to unmute in 5 seconds, and then we're going to say our favorite line from Shakespeare. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go.
To be you
is
not
resolve itself into a you.
No man's pleasure.
Thine own self be true.
Beautiful.
Trust.
I love it. Shakespeare, if he existed, is very happy wherever he is now. Thank you very much, everybody. Cool. Everyone in the audience now, just make sure you've muted again, just in case. Okay, so without much further ado, I'm going to hand over to Chris and Bouclet, who are going to spend the next sort of 15 minutes-ish talking about the project that really triggered this whole sort of collaboration and working process, Lockdown Shakespeare. Thank you.
Thank you, Henry. I'm going to be handing over to Buhle shortly. Just as I've been with great joy scrolling through all of the names in the participants list, I did see that Fumban Piri, our colleague from Malawi, is there, and he mentioned that he was having audio problems earlier. But Fumban, give us a thumbs up if you're good to go later on with your audio. Fantastic. Thank you. Lovely to have you with us. Good. So Buhle will tell you about Lockdown Shakespeare. But before she does that, I'm going to introduce her as a performer. Buhle is also the resident artist for 2021 at the Tsikinya-Chaka Centre, and we are very proud that she has that title. And so if she feels comfortable, I'm going to quickly give you a snippet of her Lockdown Shakespeare Hamlet, and then I'll hand over to her to speak about the project and whatever else she would like to speak about. So I'm going to share my screen briefly. And play.
Whether 'tis noble in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles and by opposing end them, to die, to sleep no more, and by a sleep to say we end the heartache and the thousand natural shocks that flesh is heir to. 'Tis a consummation most partly to be wished. To sleep, to sleep, the chance to dream.
Alrighty, once more. That's okay. Thank you very much, Chris. Alrighty, everybody. What I'm going to do is I'm immediately going to put on my timer to 7 minutes, because I could really go on and on and on about all things Shakespeare. And to me, it almost feels like it's two separate conversations: the Lockdown Shakespeare specific conversation, and Shakespeare and Buhle and how that came to be. I think that as a starting point, I'd just like to touch on what I said a little bit earlier, in saying that I never, ever, ever thought that I was going to fall in love with Shakespeare. I've always wanted to perform. I've always loved telling stories, and I've always loved to write. But I always felt like, quite frankly, Shakespeare was definitely that white man that was for white people, and that only English-speaking people could figure out what the hell he was saying, and basically it had absolutely nothing to do with me. That was up until about, let's say, 7 years ago or so. But mind you, in South Africa, you know, I did do Shakespeare in high school, but that also just meant that I basically learned all the quotes that I was supposed to write in my exams. So I didn't necessarily understand what it was that I was writing about, but I just knew, just write to be or not to be. That's the proper answer, which is something that I've also been interested in tackling in my work as a performer and as an educator of the Bard's work in South Africa specifically. Anyhow, I discovered, as I said, a shared legacy between Shakespeare and I through Salt Blakey. 7 years ago, my grandmother passed away. I was in the Northwest, which is my family, where my family is originally from. And I was going through the garage and looking at books, all sorts of things. And I found a copy of Julius Caesar, translated into Setswana by Salt Blakey and published in 1937 by Wits Press. Now, that automatically completely blew my mind, because I went, okay, so for so long, I've been looking at this man's work very much as something that's very distant from me. But now all of a sudden, I have to imagine that my grandparents learned about this work pre-Bantu education in an apartheid South Africa. That completely blew my mind, because I suddenly went, wow, I actually do have every right to access this thing, to touch this thing, to rip it apart, to have an opinion on it. Cut to 2 years later, I was awarded a residency to the RSC, which in itself was really incredible, but I don't think that I would have had the same experience at the RSC as I did if I did not know about Salt Blakey's work. if I did not know that Africa has engaged with this work in this way. There was no way. I think I speak about all of this because that was the same attitude or the same energy that I brought to Lockdown Shakespeare last year, I think. Obviously, all of us know lockdown came, COVID came, we were shocked, we were surprised, we didn't know what was cracking. For me, I had lost my mum 6 months earlier. So I was in a lot of just my first level of grief, let's say, the first stage of grief. And I found that being caught in this house where I had looked after my mother as a primary caregiver for a year without the opportunity to create was quite literally killing me. And it started to make me think about all of the artists in South Africa or in the world right now who were faced with this exact predicament. Artists who don't get to make, who don't get to create, who don't get to express themselves. Essentially, we are dying. We know we are all dying anyway, but it feels more immediate. So I called Chris up because Chris is amazing and is always willing to kind of go along with me. And I said, okay, cool, Chris, I want to start this thing, Lockdown Shakespeare. I want to open it up. I want to say to not just artists in South Africa, I just want to say to communities, everybody, if you can find, I tried not to say Shakespearean text initially also just because that closes off a lot of options. You'll find that they'll pick that anyway, but just say traditional and classic initially, because everybody runs away, you know. And so I said to Chris, I'd like to open it up. I'd like to ask everyone to pick their own classic text. And all you have to do is in that environment that you're stuck in, I want you to perform it between 1 to 2 minutes long. And Chris said to me, we did have a small budget. So we could give the first, how many was it, Chris? I think it was the first 20 or 30 performers who would enter their videos, and all you had to do was record it, go onto Instagram, put it there, put the hashtag, and then we could find you. We would give them a small salary of 1,000 Rand, which is not a lot, but you would be shocked. I can make an entire film with just 1,000 Rand. I don't know what your equivalent is in all of your countries, but just know that it is very minimum money. Anyway, so we got a wild response from all sorts of people, which was so incredible also just because I think that the problem with arts communities worldwide, I'd even dare to say it, fine, yeah, worldwide, is that we're also accustomed to seeing the people who we think do these things, that we never venture out and give other people an opportunity, or everyone else who is not in that space never tries, because we think that we can't, for all of the reasons that I listed earlier, you know. So what was incredible was to see so many actors, performers, and people from all across South Africa offer something. And it wasn't about being right. It wasn't about iambic pentameter or not. It was about telling story. What I enjoyed even more about all of that was, I said, I think in our post, we did say you can put it in whatever language, whichever context you'd like to, but to see all of the artists take that a step further was so incredible. And I started to see how it was possible that Salt Blakey had that vision at that point, you know, after watching Hamlet in 1891 in Kimberley, to go, wow, I love this story. Now I'm going to go ahead and translate it into Julius Caesar, die Tschuntrutsacha Julius Caesar. So, that Hamlet that you just saw was one of my own offerings. I also did a Juliet, the speech where, thou knowest the mask of night is on my face, that speech, but I placed it at a very popular bar in South Africa, you know, for kids, just so that we could all start to get that feel, you know, that it can be anywhere, and to really place these characters in honest, everyday scenarios. Alongside that, I was invited to work with a new group of students. Wow, it says 7 minutes. Sorry, Henry, I'm gonna have to steal another 2. It's happening. Sorry, Chris, I promise I'll wrap it up.
I think everyone's having a good time, Buklet, so keep going, please. Okay,
so we're okay. Okay, cool. Anyway, alongside Lockdown Shakespeare and starting to see these South African artists, also Annalisa Pewa, just wave there, is the most incredible Romeo. Everybody hire this man. You will not regret it. So good. Since he's there, we might as well say, I will be sure to put up his Romeo. Oh, wait, we're going to watch his Romeo, but yes, very good. But I'll put all of it up. I digress. I was invited by another university in South Africa to work with their students during lockdown. And what I found was, because I had watched so many lockdown Shakespeares, I could go into that process with quite a clear idea of what we could potentially make, even though none of us were in the same room. So they were doing a Midsummer Night's Dream, and I went, gosh, this is incredibly exciting, because to me, just an example is I could speak to them about the need to really make an entrance and be clear about where you're coming from in a Shakespeare, just because when you come on stage, I really need to feel like you are coming from a forest and running around for hours and being chased by so-and-so. But it was incredible then to have my students on these blocks and then to be able to go, okay, so I want a Helena to come here. That's a Helena to me. That's love, you know. I want, if someone's going to be coming from here, you know, really give me that entrance, you know. So playing with all of that, along with playing with, okay, in the background for Zoom, we can put a forest here and a forest at number 5, 6, and 7, so that we know that all of you are the lovers and all of you are in the forest right now, or all of you are in the castle. But anyway, it went really, really well, and they were actually awarded the industry award, which was really, really incredible. But also just because, hi Luntu, there's another one who gave us Lockdown Shakespeare. I'm going to plug all of the actors here. When I see you guys, I'm going to tell everyone to employ you, because it's the truth. And me, please. Anyway, I also just want to touch on a little bit of the work that I've done with the University of Cape Town. That's when I started exploring language specifically, just because I found that with my students, it really irritated me that I could see that a lot of my Black students were incredible at this thing. The only thing that was standing in between us was the English, you know. And as I said, because I discovered that Blakey had done this that long ago, I just went, I don't have to be precious about this thing. I can also begin to try and do this. But I think that what was so important was, so I'm Setswana speaking, and Blakey also wrote, translated it into Setswana. So what that meant was I could really read it. Sorry, what I'm trying to explain is difficult, but one day we will, it's actually not difficult. It's just a case of the language that Blakey chooses to use in Tsikinya-Chaka Julius Caesar is also not nonsense, you know. It's not just picking up a book, you know, and just going, okay, so to be or not to be, what's that in Setswana? You know, it's not that simple. It really is still about capturing the imagery behind the language. And so what that does is, when we're working with students with the language, it actually gives us an opportunity to explore home languages with the students and for them to fall in love with the story and their own language, you know. And that was incredible for me too, because when I look at Tsikinya-Chaka Julius Caesar, there are so many words in there that I didn't even know existed in Setswana. You know, calamities, it's there, you know, the descriptions, the things, they are all there. So being able to discover that along with my students was wild, especially because initially they were so excited. They were like, oh, wow, yay, we're going to do it in Xhosa. It's going to be great. It's going to be great. Then I gave them the Xhosa text and they were like, yo, I'd rather do it in English now, which was so incredible because it's about the integrity of the language. So, for example, as I said, I didn't just translate it into Xhosa. I worked with a Xhosa speaking, you know, proper translator. And just because I happen to understand Xhosa also, we could work as a, I don't know, a director, a playwright, and as a performer all in one, which is kind of what you need with the immediacy of what Shakespeare requires. I hope this is all making sense. Then the final two things that I want to close with, just on that note, is a few years ago, but I started working with Prof. Sabata Mokai, who works at Salt Lake University in Kimberley. And it's from the same region in South Africa as me. And what was so wild is So he, Chris will speak more about him, but we started to work a little bit with Hamlet and Setswana, for example. And what I've discovered there is also so insane, because now when him and I are working together through the entire text, we are thinking, okay, cool. So we have to think about Saul Plaatje, 1891, how he would be translating this. There's Prof. Sabata, how he hears it and how he translates it. There's Buhle, who is a young person of this time who translates it. What does that mean? And the combination of that is so beautiful and so rich. And and the final thing is, hello, Ben Crystal. I'm so excited that you're here. I also had no idea that you were such a very, very big, important person. Guys, I saw a tweet during lockdown that said, if anybody would like to play around with some monologues or, get some more experience with Shakespeare. I did it because I took him up on the offer. I love a free thing, only to find out that it's Ben Crystal and we got to do Portia together, guys. I'm very impressed and very excited by you. Thank you all. I'm going to keep quiet. I'm sorry, Henry.
Don't apologize, Bule. That was amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Buhle. I won't add a loud applause, but you can see all the hands there appreciating what you've said. And it's wonderful to think of what lockdown has enabled. We all have a pervasive and I would say prevailing sense of loss when we think about theatre and COVID. But we do know that some opportunities have developed, and today is an example of that. So thank you for the various strands and trajectories that you've discussed. I'm going to be showing just a few snippets of some of our South African Lockdown Shakespeare videos, and a couple of the performers of those monologues are with us today. Buchle's mentioned Annalisa and Luntu. Luntu I have plugged. We're talking about plugging. I've used Luntu's Caliban from The Tempest in other contexts, so I had to cut him from today for time reasons. Sorry, Luntu. But Maya Taub is here with us as well, and I'm just going to get straight into it and give you a little mini narrative, after which I will apologize to our chair, Henry, for the fact that the South African contingent has gone slightly over time, but I think we're okay as far as that goes. So I'm going to share my screen with you, and we'll just have a taster.
I know that virtue to be in you, Brutus, as well as I do know your outward favor. Well, honor is the subject of my story. I cannot tell what you and other men think of this life, but for my single self, I had as lief not be, as live to be in awe of such a thing as I myself.
And I'm sorry to stop Soyiso Ndaba midstream there, but this is really an example I wanted to give of setting, really creative and inventive use of the card to sort of imagine dialogue and imagine an absent interlocutor. So that's Soyiso Ndaba as Cassius, and then we're going to jump to a slightly different. Sorry, I'm battling to persuade. Here we go. We're going to jump to
friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. I have come to bury Caesar, not to praise him. The evil that men do lives after them.
So that is Tami Mbongo, who is the only person who contributed to Lockdown Shakespeare who chose to make explicit and emphatic a city setting, an urban setting, an outside space. And I chose this video simply because it chimes very nicely with the work that our colleagues in Ghana have done, which you'll be seeing a little bit later, that is site-specific, for want of a better phrase. So those are two Julius Caesars. And we will now move to the much touted, after you've heard Buchle's punt, you'll be expecting great things. Annalisa Pewa as Romeo.
'Tis torture and not mercy. Heaven is here where Juliet lives. And every cat and dog and little mouse and every unworthy thing lives here and may look upon her. But Romeo may not. More validity, more honorable state, more courtship lives in carrion flies than Romeo.
Again, reluctant though I am to stop Annalisa in full flight, I'm going to leap ahead to Gabriel doing, I don't think Gabe would mind me saying this, it was circulating enthusiastically on Twitter and Facebook the time it was posted as a depiction of Hamlet the asshole. So don't think that having seen Buhle in sorrowful mode that we have to always sympathize with Hamlet. This is Hamlet being being an asshole.
Speech, I pray you, as I pronounced it to you, trippingly on the tongue. But if you mouth it, as many of your players do, I had as lief the town crier spoke my lines. Nor do not saw the air too much with your hand thus, but use all gently. For in the very torrent tempest, and as I may say, the whirlwind of passion, you must acquire and beget a temperance that may give it smoothness. Oh, it offends me to the soul to hear a robustious, periwig-pated fellow tear a passion to tatters, to very rags, to split the ears of the groundlings, who for the most part are capable of nothing but inexplicable dumb shows and noise. Okay, so Gabe and Annalisa chose a sort of single camera angle, for want of a better way of phrasing it. What we're going to see now are two instances of slightly different camera work moving through interior spaces. Though they're both Lady Macbeths. The first is Amanda Seome, and Amanda's is interesting because she has taken advantage of precisely the kind of trans-languaging bilingualism that Buhle was discussing earlier, a combination of her own translation and text from Welcome Msomi's Umabata. So here we go. Wozani, come you spirits. This is a slightly longer extract.
I burned to question them further. Yini kwenze njani? Ntombo, ngiletha umbiko ukuthi inkosi uMdakazela izovakashela lapha eValelane namhlanje. Uqinisekile ngalokho kushoyo? Ngiqiniseke Nkulunkulu. Ngikhuluma nje inkosi uMdakazela isayithende endlini. Mnikezeni utshwala Thibukoma. Usilethele indaba ezimnandi. The raven himself is hoarse, but crooks the fatal entrance of Duncan under my battlements. Uzani mimoya yobumnyama nonya. Ngivuleni ningiqaqe. Ngingabi nenhliziyo ethambile yomfazi. Ngixolise inzondo nobulukhono nonya enhlizweni yami. Yenzani igazi lami lingahambi. Alingabi nayo imigwaqo yesiyawu.
I really do have to say it each time. It feels like some kind of offense to cut an actor off mid-line, so I apologize for doing that. But we have the chance to shift to Liatile Mohale, who has also got a Lady Macbeth from the same scene with some interesting lighting. And when we're talking about home spaces and trying to create atmosphere, mood with lighting effects, this is a very interesting example. Sorry.
Give him 10 guineas. He brings great news. The raven himself is hoarse that croaks the fatal entrance of Duncan under my battlements. Come, you spirits that tend on mortal thoughts, and sex me here, and fill me from the crown to the toe, cup full of direst cruelty.
I will leave you to guess what she does with that knife. But if you watch the rest of the video, you probably think she actually cuts herself. I certainly did and do. Now, 2 more performances. We've seen Buhle disappearing from the room and coming back in, and Ashley Harvey as, oh dear, I've got the wrong Ashley Harvey. Oh dear. Do you know what? I think in the interest of time, I'm going to simply recommend that you have a look. Ashley Harvey appears 3 times on our Lockdown Shakespeare, as an Amelia, and as an Angelo, and also as Viola. Seeing as we've seen Buhle disappear from the room and come back, we've had that effect already, but I'd recommend that you go and watch Ashley's performances. She also speaks of the mouthful of ice cream, which is gives a great sense of kind of giving a comical video diary, I suppose, as Viola's freaking out. So apologies to Ashley in her absence, but we will skip ahead to the final video, which is Maya Taub's, how could we describe it? I'll let Maya talk about it later. Surreal fever dream, a series of TikTok videos that he experimented with. And this is a clip that is, I suppose, a response primarily to Antony and Cleopatra.
The eyes over the files and lusters of the wall have glowed like cratered Mars. Now bend, now turn the office, and devotion of their names upon at He's kept his heart, which in the scuffles of great fights has burst the buckles on his breast. Renegues all temper.
Okay, there we go. So that just gives you a taster. Happily, all of the Lockdown Shakespeare videos are up on YouTube and on Shakespeare ZA for you to explore at your leisure and to watch and watch again. But hopefully that will stimulate the conversation and give you a sense of some of the echoes, the resonances, the influences, the mutual cross-pollination and the dialogues we've already identified across our 4 geographical spaces, hopefully with an indication of more to come. So thank you, Henry.
Let's give some love to Buhle and Chris. Absolutely beautiful stuff. And all the performers. Please do go there to see all those videos. I'm just reposting the Padlet. Do go in there. There's a link on there to click through. Chris or Buhle, you might want to just chuck the link in the chat. But some really beautiful work there, real detail, and really inspirational. And so thank you so much for triggering a chain of events with this Lockdown Shakespeare that led to the work that Steve and I are going to be talking about now. I don't know if we can work out the distance between Wits University and the University of Western Scotland, but it's probably quite far away. But yeah, so I was inspired by this project and I wrote a review of the project for Shakespeare Bulletin 38.3, which is due to come out in the next couple of months. And in fact, the proofs have just been sent through. So that reminds me, I should have a look at those, shouldn't I? I don't want to annoy Pete Cohen, who had 3 books out last week. How does somebody write 3 books? Anyway, Pete's great. If you don't know his work, please look it up. So this review, where I looked at some of the kind of issues that are talking about here and actually just gave a whole load of love to some brilliant performers, got my intellectual and creative juices going. And I started this job at University of Western Scotland in Ayr in January. And the first thing I did, almost, was work out how I could create a Lockdown Shakespeare performance project into my teaching that was inspired by the work in South Africa that could use the work that Buhle and all the performers that have been doing so well. So it happened. First year module on our BA performance, tell all your friends and family to apply. There's a module called Practice Text Base, and the first year's 38 first year acting performance students did a lockdown Shakespeare recording. Now, there are several drives behind this. Partly the South African project was just so good that I wanted to work with it, but also it involves a process of decentering curriculum, which many UK universities are currently considering. I saw the South African lockdown Shakespeare model as a great example of expertise which the students in Scotland could learn from. In this sense, it sort of effortlessly inverts some of the really problematic hierarchies that can exist in relation to teaching institutions in the global north, working with content from the global south. Now, my colleague Steve Collins is much better placed to talk about this because this is one of the areas that he researched brilliantly. So Steve, do you want to just pick up that thought for a second?
Yeah, for sure. So thanks, Henry. A lot of my work, I suppose, over the last however many years has been very much this kind of this flipping of kind of knowledge from the global south to the global north. I mean, traditionally, for the past few hundred years, and obviously kind of that's what's simmering underneath kind of quite a lot of the conversations that are already coming through on the chat. So that's really interesting. But the knowledge flows and kind of culture flows, or kind of what constitutes culture flows from north to south. So a lot of my work has been very much about kind of seeing how that can be inverted and what it means to invert that. So as Henry says, this project, and this is already coming through in such a big way, this project is so much more about simply kind of restaging Shakespeare, but it's about ways of exploring critical questions of language, power, heritage, and performance. And through using Shakespeare as a starting point, which is, I think, what we're doing, we get to ask much bigger questions around notions of cultural legitimacy, whose culture counts and on what terms, how English as a colonizing language intersects with local languages or home languages, custom and background to bring new meaning to well-known and quite controversial text. And perhaps most interestingly, how these performances can create a context where work in the global south leads learning in the global north. And I think for us working here in this context, that is one of the most exciting things to really engage with. So here in Scotland, for example, there are linguistic communities that are marginalized by English as a colonizing language. And as yet, these are kind of academically underexplored through a kind of a colonial, post-colonial lens, but it's the kind of the parallels there are really, really compelling. So linking work with Sub-Saharan Africa and Gaelic, for example, Scots Gaelic, provides a new angle for post-colonial cultural capital, which would be really exciting to explore further. So can we take the learning that is happening in the context that that we're exploring here today and use that to kind of lead the learning here in terms of Scots Gaelic culture? Be a really interesting thing to do. So working in this way and making these short performances basically opens up this huge vault of questions that can legitimately take Shakespeare and use it to invert this traditional global north-south dynamic, simultaneously, as Henry says, decentering Shakespeare and bringing to the fore much more interesting cultural linguistic dynamism. So I think that that kind of is one of the really exciting things. Yes, it's brilliant to see these performances, but also these performances open the door to tons and tons and tons more stuff as well. So ace.
I'm very lucky to have Steve as a colleague. Isn't that great? Yeah. So let's have a look at some stuff that the students have made. Now, there are two sort of areas that I think are really interesting in terms of lockdown Shakespeare practice. I'm fascinated in how the lockdown self-recording process can augment meaning in the Shakespearean text, which we've already seen with the South African videos. And, how the process of recording and staging, yourself in your home or on the street that you live on encourages contemporary interpretation, and how being in control of that process, so you're mediating yourself, can place more focus on your ownership of Shakespeare, which is interesting. Here, Bouclé talk about her process of claiming ownership of Shakespeare for herself. Now, in that review in Shakespeare Bulletin, spoiler alert, I draw upon a really important idea from, I'm going to describe Susan Bennett as legendary because I think she is, in terms of audience frames. Okay, so Susan Bennett, you know, in her seminal work, writes about how the outer frame consists of all those cultural elements which create and inform the theatrical event, but the inner frame contains the dramatic production in a particular playing space. So that's, you know, the process of interpretation that an audience goes through. So the lockdown setting, I think, enables performers to play with the audience's outer frame, informed by the audience's own experience of the pandemic, in order to augment certain meanings in the text. I keep using the word augment. I think it's because I learned what it meant a few weeks ago. But that means just like make something bigger, right? Okay, so gets used in music quite a lot. Diminish is the opposite, an augmented fifth. Anyway, let's have a look at how that works in action. And I'm going to start by having a look at Nicole Burns's interpretation of Helena from A Midsummer Night's Dream. So let's just have a quick look. Like Chris, I feel absolutely horrible cutting these off, you know, before they get to the end. Susan Bennett is actually now, needs to just sit down for a second, and then we're going to let the video take over. So this is Nicole Burns playing Helena, and I want you to just have a think, perhaps, about how the lockdown setting here is bringing out something in the text even more that's there. Okay, let's go.
But here you mean I to enrich my pain, to have his sight thither and back again.
So we know in the play, Helena risks her life by going into the woods to follow Demetrius. Now, in Nicole's interpretation, this comes across all the more strongly by putting her face mask on to leave the house, obviously drawing attention to the fact that whenever we leave the house during the pandemic, we are putting our life at risk potentially. But also venturing further out into this forest is break in direct contradiction of Scottish lockdown law. I also want to do a shout out to Abigail Thompson, who also ended the same speech in the same way, both really intelligent takes on the text. But there are some more playful examples to draw upon too. Let's have a look at Bethany Nichols' performance as Launce, the clown from Two Gentlemen of Verona, who is admonishing their dog for a lack of emotion at their impending departure. I'm going to skip this on a bit.
I have received my proportion, like the prodigious son, and am going with Sir Proteus to the imperial court. I think Crab, my dog, be the sourest-natured dog that lives. My mother weeping, my father wailing, my sister crying, our maid howling, our cat wringing her hands, and all our house in a great 600 perplexity. So
sorry, Bethany, to cut you off there, but you can see the wonderful inventiveness that comes out of this, and it really brings out the absurdity of the closeness of Launce's relationship with Crab, to the point that Launce has set up a Zoom account especially for their dog. And we've all experienced animals making impromptu appearances during Zoom lessons and Zoom teaching, and this is giving a spotlight to that phenomenon. And also special shout out to Bowie the dog, who I think A Star Is Born. Now, we know that the pandemic has hit the performing arts industry hard, and many actors have had to contend with self-taping auditions and the like. Now, Corbin took this spirit to heart in his speech as Bottom. The tragicomic element of the disparity between Bottom's faith in himself and his actual ability is brought out even more by the fact that he self-taped. He's reviewed this footage and gone, no, that's good. I'm sending that to a casting director.
Hello, my name's Bottom, and today I'm going to be playing the part of Pyramus. Sweet moon.
There we go. We won't see any more of that, but that's a lovely inventive take, which also, I think, again, our out of frame is bringing our sort of experiences of lockdown. Now, Corbyn is part of the burgeoning cultural scene of the town of Sanquhar in Scotland. This next video also comes from there. Now, if we see Rachel Anderson's take on Puck, I'm going to skip it forward a second.
Through the forest have I gone, night and silence. Who's here? Weeds of Athens he doth wear. This is he, my master said, who despised the Athenian maid. And here, the maiden sleeping sound on this dank and dirty ground, pretty so she does not lie near this lack love, this cow courtesy.
Sorry, Rachel, to cut you off, but wonderful to see. I mean, we get the sense of, you know, Puck's in a real dilemma here, but the frustrations and urgency of what's going on is, again, it's augmented by the fact that Puck's stuck in their house and having to look at things out of their window. Apparently, the neighbours did come round to check that everything was okay with Rachel from a performance. So it's good that the community of Sanquhar likes to look after each other. Now, Act 4, Scene 3 of Othello is one of my favourite scenes in Shakespeare's plays. Here we, you know, in a play full of action and male-led violence, there's a powerful sense in the scene of drawing breath and seeing the perspectives of Desdemona and Emilia. And Amber Gebby's simple interpretation, I think, drew out some of these meanings in a really interesting way. I'm just going to have a quick look at the beginning of this speech.
But I do think it is their husband's faults if wives do fall. Say they slack their duties and pour our treasures onto foreign laps.
Sorry, there's very little glimpse of the great work that Amber's doing here. And I think what's really interesting here is the presence of Desdemona here with that zoom camera turned off. And it speaks about the levels of safety and personal privacy that Desdemona thinks that she has in this moment, obviously, which are very low. But it also speaks to the fact that the two characters are not physically sharing the same space, but it raises interesting questions about how the women in Othello have to negotiate violence and abuse in male-run spaces. And this brief moment of pause in 4-3 takes place in a digital space in which they are, in theory, more in control of. Those of us that read Foucault perhaps can think about heterotopias here. And also very, very timely in the UK with conversations ongoing and protests about whether public space actually really exists in the context of the experience of women. Now, so gender hierarchies and space were explored in many more videos, which I would like to carry on looking at. But my thing is being annoying. Oh, Jesus. So we're about to have a look at some stuff that Sophie Grubb has done. The problem is I'm going to move this. You got here, and then we can have a look. So this is a performance of Catherine from Henry VIII, which is a wonderful play. If you don't know, it's not done very often, but it's fantastic. Her playing Catherine. And it adds to this conversation, I think, about women and space. I'm going to skip it forward a second to here. I've
chosen by you. Blessed with many children by you. If, in the course and process of this time, you can report and prove it too, against mine honour oath, my bond to wedlock, or my love and duty against your sacred person, in God's name turn me away, and let the foulest contempt shut door upon me.
Sorry, Sophie, to stop that. Really powerful performance. And again here, you know, Catherine's eloquent and logical defense of herself is met by two cameras turned off and muted, which increases the sense of injustice within the text. The violent and misogynist system that leads to her banishment is sort of actualized by that camera and mic off. And, you know, Wolsey says shortly afterwards, unthink your speaking and to say no more. And that is, I think, really wonderfully brought across there. But the opportunities for editing and interpretation also help students get really creative. And Olivia Loutz's take on Juliet emphasized a really important part of Juliet's character here about how she actually thinks more, I think, than anybody else in the play, and is the most intelligent character in the play. And here,
farewell.
I'm just going to nip it forward.
Shall I be married then tomorrow morning? No, no, this shall forbid it. Lie thou there. What if it be a poison which the friar subtly hath ministered to have me dead? Lest in this marriage he should be dishonoured because he married me before to Romeo.
So again, sorry, Olivia, to cut you off there, but what we see over this whole monologue are various cuts which show Juliet thinking about her decisions over an extended period of time, which is really interesting. It really feels like a video diary, which was something that came up with the South African video. So I think it's a great example of hybrid performance, actually, which sits somewhere between work for the stage and work for the screen. But there was also some really intelligent choices about what device the character was recording their speech on, and what that told us about the various contexts of the character. Katie Whiteman did some really interesting stuff here with Portia's famous "The quality of mercy is not strained" speech. Now, this takes place in a public place, in a courtroom, and I think Katie's relationship with the links into what Bouclé was saying about the relationship between the proximity of the camera really tells us a story about where we are. I've just got to skip it forward.
Dread and fear of kings, but mercy is above the sceptre's sway. It is enthroned in the hearts of kings. It is an attribute to God himself, and earthly power doth then show like its God when mercy seasons justice. Therefore, Jew, though justice be thy plea, consider this, that in this course of justice, none of us should see salvation. We do pray for mercy.
There we go. I mean, it really feels like we're in a courtroom. And finally, I just want to have a quick look at the beginning of Stevie Patterson's video as Juliet, which is very different. It's a handheld recording.
Farewell. God knows when we shall meet again.
So again, sorry to cut you off there, Stevie, but again, it's a very, very different story being told here. And we're really, again, like some of the wonderful examples from South Africa, of the window into the soul, that proximity to that handheld camera comes out. I've got one area to quickly look at before we go over to Ghana. Now, the recently published and excellent, and I've written excellent in capital letters, Chris, Shakespeare and Accentism collection, which was edited by Adele Lee, is something which I think is very, very timely. And this considers the sort of ideological process at play in relation between Shakespeare performance and accent. And let's just have a quick look at this before I just show you a couple of very quick videos. And I think actually this quote is interesting and controversial. Some of you might not necessarily agree with it, but this idea that accentism might actually constitute a more serious problem than racism in terms of how people view Shakespeare. And as part of this module, I use Barry Rutter and his Northern Broadsides company. Those of you that don't know, Northern Broadsides were a UK company that really promoted Shakespeare in a Northern accent as an example for the students to think about in terms of how they would like to deliver their own speeches. Now, 37 out of the 38 monologues were delivered in the students' own accents, which I think is really, really interesting in terms of that relationship between filming it on your phone or in your own room and it being yours and it belongs to you in your voice. So whilst, as Lee mentions here, come on, there we go. We might be used to, for example, seeing Macbeth delivered in a Scottish accent, like Evan Warren does video here. Just going to skip it, I'm afraid. Forgive me.
Direness tomorrow, and tomorrow, and tomorrow creeps in this petty pace from day to day to the last syllable of recorded time.
So we're used to Macbeth with a Scottish accent, but are we used to Cleopatra with a Scottish accent? So here, played by Daryl Simpson. I'm going to skip ahead, Daryl.
Oh my crown.
Daryl, do you want to put in the chat where you're actually
if thou
from?
and nature can so gently part, the stroke of death is as a lover's pinch, which hurts and is desired.
Sorry to cut you off there, Daryl, but Daryl, I believe, is from a village in Ayrshire, right, Daryl? Just give me a thumbs up. If not, anyway, just pop in the chat where you're from. So we got Cleopatra from Ayrshire. We got Hamlet here, played by Max McCluskey from East Kilbride. Max, if I got that wrong, do chuck it in the chat and tell me off.
Oh, that this too, to solid flesh would melt, thaw, resolve itself into a dew. Was it the everlasting had fixed his cannon against self-slaughter?
And here I think we can really see the influence of Bouclé on Max's delivery of the speech. I know Max really enjoyed that version that you did, Bouclé. But also we have Helen from All's Well That Ends Well, being performed by Katarina Kavakova from Slovakia. I'm going to skip to a bit here, Katarina, forgive me.
Oh, I have no wife. Oh, you lead the messengers that ride upon the violent speed of fire, fly with false aim, move the steel-piercing air that sings with piercing. Do not touch my lord.
And actually, Katerina was telling me she's from a very, her accent's very specific to a certain region. Katerina, do you want to just put that in the chat? There's the precise region of Slovakia. Yeah, so actually within this kind of national idea of accent, there's even more specific things here. And then finally, we have Manon Mini's take on Phoebe from As You Like It, which was delivered in her own Franco-Scottish accent. I did check that that's the right way to describe it, and Manon is happy for that, which is partly Perigeux and partly Glasgow. So we're going to skip here again. Forgive me, Manon.
He's not very tall, but for his years he's tall. His leg is but swell. There was a pretty redness on his lip, a little viper, and molesty red and mixed in his cheek. It was just a difference between a constant red and Miguel Damask. There be some women, Sylvius.
And also, just on a technical level, really great use of circles of attention there, like the way that Manon brought her attention straight to the camera. It's really interesting, that whole idea of like your relationship with the camera. So these accents weren't used to highlight a sense of other or to make sort of quasi-xenophobic or ideologically encoded perspectives on class that we see depressingly whenever we see the mechanicals come on stage with a Birmingham accent. Rather, they present a sense that the texts that the students delivered belonged to them. And the result, having marked all 38 of them, was a strong sense of the plurality, which is a word I can't say, of Shakespeare. And this is the sort of last thought that comes from Rex Gibson, who for me is another legend. Rex Gibson is the kind of godfather of the active approaches to Shakespeare. Forget Shakespeare and think of Shakespeare's as salutary advice. The plays are capable of and invite diverse interpretations. They resist the notion of definitive performance. So his belief in the interpretative potential of Shakespeare's texts continue to drive my research and pedagogy. And I believe this spirit is what links back to Steve in terms of what we do in the future, larger scale self-recorded digital work. Thank you very much for having a listen there. I'm going to hand over to Steve, who's going to introduce the fantastic work that's been going on in Jamestown, Ghana. And I just want to say thank you so much to the students from the University of Western Scotland for engaging so strongly and powerfully with the Shakespeare text. It was, you know, a real joy to mark them. And those of us here that are academics will say that marking isn't always a joy to do. Anyway, I'm going to shut up and hand over to Steve.
Okay, thank you, Henry. Yeah, and well done, everybody. I mean, really, really fantastic work. That's the first time I've seen some of those from our students, so really delighted to see them. So just a reminder, everybody, to stick your thoughts in the chat and questions in the chat that are kind of directly to do with this, and then to be using the Padlet for future ideas. I think there's just so much kind of, as people are speaking, that is just kind of bubbling away, and we'll get to the Q&A and we'll be able to kind of capture some of those ideas as well. So I am, on a personal level, super, super delighted that we have been able to work with Act for Change as part of this project. And I really do hope that this project goes further so that we can work with Act for Change more. So Act for Change are an amazing performance-based NGO who work out of Jamestown, Ghana. They've been going for about 15 years. Myself and the great Matthew Hahn were there at their inception, and Matthew is in the room. Good guy, lovely to see you, who I know a lot of people also know from his work in South Africa as well. So he's a linchpin of our work. So the guys in Jamestown, they do an awful lot of work in performance in the community, a kind of Boal inspired work. They have, because they've been going so long, incredible standing in the community, and we've got a lot of them here now. So Collins, their director, is here, Nikwati is here, Ruth, and I know Susan was here, and Samuel Lamptey is also here, so great to see you guys. So yeah, so we're going to be showing you some of their work. Henry, are you going to share that now?
I am, unless Nia and Collins want to say anything before we go.
Collins, would you introduce?
Or do we just want to let the video do the talking?
I think maybe let's let the video do the talking. So as we're watching this then, everybody, as some of these kind of themes are beginning to emerge, I kind of like, as well as just enjoying them, because they're great, maybe start think about setting and language and storytelling as well. I think that's something that is really kind of coming through these videos particularly. So Henry, over to you.
Okay. And I think you'll also see a really interesting progression of lockdown work. And this is a video that takes us outside, but in a lockdown environment. I'm particularly interested in like sight here. Anyway, I'm going to shut up because I'm just very excited for what Nia and Collins has done. Okay, I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to share my sound and I'm going to make this full screen.
Oh, ye gods, and great and potent gods and goddess of our land, that have taken away this old man's daughter is true. True, I've married her. The very head and front of my offending at this extent, no more. Her father loved me, oft invited me, still questioning the stories of my life, the battles, the siege, the fortunes that I've gone through. From my childhood days till the very day he bade me tell it. Of accidents, from flood and fields, of the potent, insolent, who sold me into slavery. Of the cannibal, men who each other eat. The anthropophagi, and men whose head grow beneath their shoulders. My story being done, she gave me for my pain a world of kisses and sighs. She loved me for the pain I've gone through, and I loved her that she pitied me. That is the only witchcraft I have used. Chwa, Mwanyaba.
Should I repent me, but thou once put out thy light.
My mother had a maid called Barbara, and she was in love. And she did love man. She's not making. God again. He's still not picking. Oh God! Lagos! What will I do to win my lord back again? Oh my God. Please pick up, pick up. What? Let husbands understand. Women or wives also have sense. They see and smell and have palates for both sweet and sour, like the husbands. I think it is the husband's fault. If women cheat.
Asio is a proper man. Let me see now. To get his place and to plump up my will in a double navary how. How? Let's see. So will I turn her virtue into bitch, and out of her own goodness make the net, and that shall enmeshed them all.
I mean, wow. Just amazing work, guys. And that took, what, like it's really been put together over the past few weeks. So, Nia and Collins, is there anything that you'd just like to say after that for us?
Yeah, all I'll say is we're trying to play around post-colonial Jamestown and localizing Shakespeare in Jamestown community. And some of the things when you talk of Jamestown, we have some interesting things that comes up or that plays along. So from the beginning of the video, you can see where you have the lagoon, where a character was there, so which is associated to Jamestown. We also have the fishing aspect of it, where the fisherman was mending nets. So trying to localize everything, and also the house where you see the woman going to wash their husband's clothes, and out of where she found this condom. And you can also see where there's a church in front of the church which is also a historical building in Jamestown as well. And we also have the lady in the boxing gloves. Jamestown is also noted in producing world-class boxes. And so we are trying to switch it up to make it make it a gender role. Because when you talk of boxing, all that will come into your mind is a man boxing. But in this case, we're trying to use it, we're trying to flip the coin, using the female as a boxer in telling the story. So me.
Fantastic. That was great, Collins. Yeah, I mean, it's so rich in terms of interpretation there. There's so much of the text being brought out, and also so much being said about Jamestown as well, which is really interesting. Fantastic, Collins. Nee, anything you'd like to add?
I think Collins has said everything. So, because of time, I would like us continue. Maybe during the Q&A, people might ask more questions, and we will address them.
Fantastic. Cheers, Nick. And we'll just mention the great Olympics football team whilst we can. Go them. Okay, so we are very we're completely overrunning, but that's life. C'est la vie. Finally, I want to share, and this is a very sort of brand new, hot off the press addition to this sort of collaboration. I've just put a pin. Fumban Piri, hello. Do you want to just unmute yourself and say hello?
Hello.
And whereabouts?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you very well. Whereabouts are you coming in from?
Coming from Blantyre in Malawi. I do work with this young theatre group called YGC Theatre, Youth Global Collaboration. So it's a group of youngsters who collaborate to do artistic work for theatre for children and young people, and also to do theatre for education in secondary schools. So we decided to devise Shakespeare production for theatre performance. At the same time, we do some workshops with theatre students in high schools, because we don't have formal education for theatre here in Malawi. So we utilize that theatre element about Shakespeare to train youngsters to become theatre makers. Yeah, so as I'm saying, it's a bit something else. Right now, my team is in the auditorium. They are rehearsing a production. They're trying to craft a performance for online performance to share with some secondary schools. If you can give me some few minutes, I can join them. You can see some typical rehearsals. Is that possible?
Yes, absolutely. Let's get in.
Yeah.
Let's get sweaty in the rehearsal.
All right. Okay, so this is Bilimankhwe Center. We know we should meet up here to do some rehearsals. Yeah. So my team is right here. Let me just show you a piece of a performance from them.
Hang on, Fuma. Before you do it, can everyone just say hello? Everyone unmute and say hello to Malawi. Hello.
Hi.
Hello.
All right. So I'm going to give you a piece. Are you ready? Yeah. Are you ready? Just in few seconds. Let's do it. Let's do it. Let's do it. All right. I hope it is very clear. You can see. Right. No matter what we do in performances, we do extract performances, we do some areas of experimental. So we decided to do Macbeth in form of experimental element. We first translated the normal Elizabeth English to contemporary English to fit for the Malawian context. Right. Are you ready? All right. On 3, 2, 1, action.
The day is yours in Scotland! You should find King Duncan and tell him about the good news.
All right. Thank you. That was it.
Oh my goodness.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for that. Thank you.
So that's part of the group. Why this is a group of youngsters. We are trying our best to fit ourselves in the society of theatrical performance here in Malawi. Yeah.
Fantastic. And yeah, I mean, I can't believe tickets were free for this event, everyone. I mean, come on, you're getting value for money. You've had about 20 Shakespeare plays presented to you in a variety of different ways, in a variety of different countries. Absolutely amazing. And okay, and it's just so nice to see 4 different countries approaching things with an idea kind of in our heads, but all working in slightly different ways that are kind of unique to where we are. Amazing. Oh, so everyone, questions. We officially we're finishing now, so I'm okay hanging around a bit longer. I don't know if everybody else is. So let's cast our mind back to the South African lockdown Shakespeare, the examples of practice in Scotland, the wonderful video put together in Ghana, and that rehearsal room in Malawi. Thoughts, observations, questions, anything anyone would like to find out a bit more about? Scottish students, anything you'd like to ask the South African performers or anybody? Different people involved in these projects is a good chance for you to communicate. And if you want to put your thoughts into the Padlet, thank you, Joshua, wherever you are. I think you're in America. Thank you for helping me out from America. Anyone got anything they'd like to ask, or anyone on the panel would like to ask each other? The floor is open.
I'd just like to say thank you so much to everybody for joining us, and engaging in this way was really, really exciting. I know that we're all living through a global pandemic, but to be able to cut through borders in this way is incredibly exciting. I dare say that we wouldn't have done it pre-COVID. So this is incredibly exciting. And well done, Scottish students. You guys killed it. Amazing, amazing, amazing. Please ask your teachers to invite me over Zoom or in real life.
Always welcome, Boucle. But absolutely second that. It's really interesting, this whole transnational way of working. Let's not underplay how dreadful this pandemic's been and the amount of people that have died and have become seriously ill. But it has also made us ask questions about where we are and how much we can collaborate, and that's been one of the few positives I think to come out of this, is the fact we're all communicating in this way. Chris, you've got your hand up very politely.
Thanks, Henry. Well, also just wanted to say thanks to all of those who've participated, and to just share what I suppose is a combination, I'm sure, from many South African theatre makers and others elsewhere who have been removed from a stage for so long, a gentle hint of envy towards Fumban and colleagues, but also the exhilaration of seeing work happening on stage. And I think just judging from the reactions of our audience to seeing that insight into process, right, to seeing work in rehearsal, I think it speaks to a really strong appetite which has emerged from our COVID context for understanding what probably most of us as audience members used to happily think of as the sort of distant magic that happens behind the scenes. And we're happy to sort of see the finished product. And in some way, being forced to spend so much time looking only at screens and seeing kind of screen and technology-based inventiveness has, I think, grown an audience appetite for thinking about process as product, for want of a better way of putting it, for appreciating, you know, what happens when theatre makers are together in a rehearsal space or a workshop space. So it's been really great to kind of compare the innovation that we've seen from professional theatre makers and from students using, let's call it, two-dimensional screen-based performance modes, and to kind of map that against what Fumban and colleagues have shown us in Malawi. And perhaps the hybrid between those two is precisely what you've described and what we've seen from our colleagues in Ghana, which is something tangible and site-specific being enabled, even though it is still digital in that sense. So I think there's, perhaps out of these two, what we used to think of as two kind of separate modes of theatrical practice, something new is emerging. And a final comment, which is just to kind of acknowledge that in South Africa at the moment, COVID has plunged the performing arts into a crisis, or perhaps just pushed performing artists deeper into crisis mode because of wider questions around state support for the arts and infrastructure. And it's very also, I think, gratifying to kind of connect to colleagues in other national contexts who might be facing very different challenges, but to feel a sense of solidarity. I don't want to speak on behalf of the South African performers who are here, but I see Boucle nodding enthusiastically, and it's a grim time for those in the performing arts in South Africa. So it's been really affirming to have the connection to colleagues in other national contexts.
Absolutely, and actually, just I mean, from my perspective as an educator working during the pandemic, and there's some of us here, it's been an unbelievably tough time for us all. And so being able to see new work being made by people and bring that into my own teaching has had a sort of similar lift, I think. Some really lovely comments coming in from everybody, and also some people are leaving their sort of information in the Padlet. Please, if you see some of this stuff and you think perhaps there's ways of connecting up, please do put that in. I'm going to put my email address here in case anybody wants to get in touch with me, and perhaps there's a way of linking things up. I suppose one thing we haven't talked about, and people are sort of mentioned it a few times, and Steve, perhaps this is something, I know you're interested in this idea, and it kind of, I'm really interested in what Collins and Nee have done in terms of developing the practice and taking it onto site. And some of these sites are sites with colonial heritage, right? And what putting these performances in front of those sites and reading them in the way, really interesting, inventive ways that you've done, Collins and Nee, what that tells us about some of those post-colonial Shakespeare conversations. I suppose I'm interested in people's thoughts about that. I don't know, Steve, I know you've thought about that.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I'm happy to kick off. I sort of think it would be really interesting to get various views on this, because I sort of think that maybe this is something that we could kind of coalesce around a little bit. But in Jamestown, I know, I mean, kind of a lot of my work has been lucky enough to have worked with these guys a lot over the years, and we've done a lot of exploration of those kind of colonial sites. So, in Jamestown, and then Ushertown just down the road, and then, not too much.
I am so sorry to do this to you and to be so incredibly rude. I have to head off to a rehearsal. So I just wanted to say goodbye and thank you so much to everybody. I will be watching the rest of this recording though. It's been so incredible. I can't wait until we all get together again. Adieu, goodbye, have fun, come up with solutions, make artists billionaires. Actually, let's not have billionaires, but make artists rich. We can do things. Bye.
Amen. Indeed. Thank you, Bukhele, so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
You have to follow that, Steve.
I know, right? Well, I mean, yeah, let's make artists billionaires. I think I'll hand over to Nee to talk about how we can spend the money. No, so one of the things that we've been looking at is kind of the position of these old buildings in these kind of, and the legacies of these colonial sites in Jamestown. It's kind of one of the main areas of our research, really, and using this project, this Shakespeare project, to kind of I suppose kind of tacitly ask questions of these sites. So these are UNESCO World Heritage sites. They're under kind of, they're under, and as such, they are kind of strictly controlled in a way, and they are promoted in a way, but they're also kind of quite reserved in a way as well. So they're not allowed to be that present. They're not allowed to be that used for the people. They kind of tell a very specific historic story, but how much of that story is known, and then how much of that story is kind of open to reinterpretation by people who live around those places now is a really interesting question. So maybe Nee and Collins, I mean, you use those sites quite a lot during this piece, and obviously, we've worked around kind of the James Fort and so on and so forth a fair amount. What do you think your relationship, or what do you think kind of the stories of these sites could be, or how could we use this project to maybe kind of engage with or retell those stories in an interesting way? That's a bit of an amorphous question, but maybe pick the bones out of it if you can. Mr. Kwati.
Yeah, I think you've already set the ball rolling, but what I would like to add to this is the fact that when you look at Jamestown, it is the indigenous people and also the British heritage. And also there's been a lot of intermarriages in Jamestown between nationals from all over the world. And so when you look at some of the legacies that it left, it's important that in looking at Shakespeare also, Shakespeare not just as an English playwright who was writing for just an English audience, but the themes in Shakespeare's stories are so universal to the extent that this is a way of trying to tell a story that any audience in the world can be able to associate with, but in the same time, also looking at the nuances of the different aspects of the plays from our own perspective. So it is a way that it's local in a way that is also universal. What a lot of you there in the academics will call the globalization. So it's a kind of a globalization kind of concept of how can we use our local things and tell a very global story using all these edifices, these forts and castles, these cathedrals, using how indigenous culture in terms of, for instance, the lagoon where the libation was poured, the knowledge generation of how colonialization has hampered on traditional African religion, for instance. It's also quite interesting. So these are a lot of Henry used the term underexplored areas where we also thought, for instance, in this particular short project, we're thinking of if Shakespeare characters could live in Jamestown, where specifically would they be found? And what would they be saying? Which line would they pick? So you realize that people pick the lines, they pick the text. Everyone chose where they wanted to be videoed. And that was also one interesting aspect. So I think that the globalization aspect of this whole thing is what we would also like to explore further in further projects. I don't know if any of my colleagues, Samuel, Collins, Ruth, and others have to say as well.
Can I just chip in and say, well, the other thing that's really interesting is that because it's so easy to record things now, you can record things on a phone or a camera or whatever, you can get in front of those sites or even into those sites in a way that's much easier, in fact, even in a sort of guerrilla filmmaking style. And that whole sense of like rethinking and perhaps even sort of reclaiming some of these sites is enabled by this kind of self-capturing thing, which is fascinating. I also love the idea of asking an actor, where in this town would your character live? And actually, instead of sitting in a rehearsal room going, I think it's like this, and I write it down, you actually just like go there and record it. I mean, that's fascinating for me.
Thanks.
Anyone else from the Jamestown project here that would like to contribute, follow on from what Nia was saying?
Yes. Yeah, just a quick one. So to buttress the point from Nick Watulai earlier, it is important that you look at these areas, and like Steve was, trying to get us on, it's important that you identify now what are the areas we would want to identify. Are those identified areas colonial buildings? Well, the colonial buildings we could say are the typical, architectural structure, but it could also be more. So the colonial relations between the people of Jamestown and the history in the past could also come to play. That is why I think in this day and age, it's important and quite easy to actually record with your phone, because then you are living in the moment. You are from the community. People identify with you. But it's quite difficult to actually have complete strangers come in to film in the community where many people don't know them. So as performers living in Jamestown, coming from Jamestown, it was quite easier in doing this, taking these shots, visiting these sites. Maybe we can also explore many other areas where they are, like you said, undervalued or underutilized. Then we can go there, see the kind of history or story we could get from there, and then get on with it. Because I believe this, watching all the things we've done, I think that sitting and watching it makes one only proud. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Samuel. I think it's interesting that your company, Act for Change, was kind of very influenced by Augusto Boal, right? I don't want to misrepresent you, but that is true. And if you think back to the origins of image theatre, the Boal technique, it came from giving people cameras to take pictures of where they're from. And that then developed the image theatre technique. And there's a real parallel, I think, in terms of how Boal saw the world and what his vision of what theatre practice was about, with and the freedom that self-recording can give you. And I think Ben's made a good point in the chat about Ben Crystal, sorry, has made a good point in the chat about accessibility, that you need the internet, you need a computer to be able to see some of these things. But in the research that I do outside of Shakespeare, I'm always blown away by actually how much access there is to be able to self-tape and self-record. So there's this really interesting, I think, direct straight line from the beginnings of Boal's Theatre of the Oppressed through to the video that you all made. It's really that your sort of identity as a company is so clear, and it's interesting to hear you put it in those terms, Samuel. Like, I think there's a really clear parallel there.
Yeah. Just a little point to add to what you just said. In terms of Augusto Boal, you know, there are also a lot of parallels between African storytelling, Boal's technique, as well as the Shakespeare story, you know. And if you do a glance through all the Shakespeare plays, you realize that Shakespeare has some of his characters, if you like, being like the storytellers, or the writers of the story. For instance, if you are looking at the story of Othello that we played, Othello itself could, if you want to analyze from another point, is actually within the story as a character, and actually as the writer of the story. If you look at the character of Othello, in the way that African story is also told. So the relationship is there. And Boal also have the role of the Joker, who is part of the performance and actually facilitating the whole story. So there are a lot of parallels running through, and I could see in future a lot of things that we could explore together as a team, international team together. Thank you.
Thanks, Dean. Somebody give us lots of money then, so we can do that. Okay, no, there's some really interesting comments, and also some really fascinating projects that are coming up in the chat. Like Philip Pars just posted some things which sound absolutely brilliant, and I'm just about to say, please send me an email, Philip, because that sounds great. And thanks for your comments throughout the whole event today. Okay, are there any hands up anywhere? I mean, you all deserve. I mean, this has been going on for 2 hours and 20 minutes, which is a long time on Zoom, but the energy that's been coming out of like all the contributors has just made the time fly by.
Just a quick one. I just want to quickly comment on the first speaker from South Africa and how intrigued I am to actually listen and follow an African, you know, speaking so passionately about Shakespeare work and how Shakespeare has actually impacted on their work. I mean, it's one of the things that really looks very interesting to me, because, you know, many a times, like she rightly put it, the Shakespeare story has always been Shakespeare as a white person who wrote for a white audience. But, you know, there is always the theme that people everywhere can actually relate to, like love. Everybody can relate to love. Like conflict, everybody can relate to conflict. Things that Shakespeare wrote about and how it was actually delivered. So for me, that has been one of the things, you know, being part of this session has really enlightened me. I would like to confess, I wasn't a big Shakespeare fan, but listening to works, listening to people speak passionately about him, I've actually intrigued me to go in more, read more about him, and also get to know a lot more about his work. So thank you for this opportunity.
There we go. Yeah, that's really cool to hear. And that's kind of the point of these sorts of transnational conversations, isn't it? I mean, my whole perspective on Shakespeare has completely changed over the course of this project as well, whether it's the work that Boutlé and Chris has done or the amazing stuff that you're doing in Jamestown as well. And also great to have that little glimpse into Malawi and rehearsal room. I'm still kind of recovering from that. That is so cool. That made me so happy. Great. Anyone else would like to just, I think maybe let's just have maybe one last thought before we all go away into our various time zones and places. Pressure's on. Who wants the last word? Probably shouldn't have said last word, because that does put the pressure on, doesn't it? Go on, Chris.
Just to say that you know, there've been expressions of enthusiasm and interest from many of the participants today, and if anybody is battling to make contact with somebody that they saw a glimpse of or would like to follow up with, I think you know, Henry and I and Steve and Bukle would be happy to be the go-betweens. And I think, Henry, anybody who's participated in today's event would be able to contact you. Am I correct? And they've got the email there, so, and you know, we'll hopefully post a recording if we can. But anyone who'd like to connect with anybody else in what is now our sort of micro community of 100 odd people, we could definitely facilitate that to encourage more creative collaboration.
Absolutely, Chris. In the words of Wayne from Wayne's World 2, if you book the bands, they will play. And so today was the first. Sorry to end on such a highbrow note there. Yeah, thank you, Chris. Thank you, Collins. Thank you, Nee. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Bukle's not here, but she went off, and goodbye. And where's Fulman? Is he here? I think he might have gone as well. So thanks, everyone. Thank you so much for coming and for being here for 2 hours and 20 minutes. We've got square eyes, but we've got inspired square eyes. Yeah, party on, Ben. Fare thee well, and keep an eye on future things from us in the future.
Goodbye.
Bye, everyone.
Bonne nuit.